It's strange to think that just 5 years ago, Telltale Games were a relatively unknown video game development company. Fast forward to the present, and Telltale have their fingers in more gaming pies than they can seemingly handle, with multiple licensed projects being developed on the go, and many more to come in the near future. Telltale Games have played a crucial role in bringing the point-and-click adventure genre back to the forefront of popular gaming. Success didn't come overnight for Telltale though. It wasn't until the first season of The Walking Dead, which was released in November 2012, that the company struck gold. However, before Telltale decided to plump gamers in the shoes of unknown character Lee Everett, they decided to let gamers have a walk in the self-lacing shoes of Back to the Future's lead character Marty McFly. Back to the Future the game originally released for PC in late 2010, before being ported to iOS devices, Wii and PS3 in 2011. The game has now been re-released for PlayStation 4, Xbox 360 and Xbox One, to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the film franchise. Although it's easy to see how Back to the Future the game helped to lay the foundations for later Telltale games, in actual fact it differs quite a lot from their more recent productions, which as I'll explain throughout this review proves to be both a good and a bad thing. Events within the game follow on from the end of the third film, with Marty coming to terms with the fact that Doc Brown seems to have decided to live permanently in 1885 with his wife Clara. In the present, Doc's estate is being sold, as he hasn't been around to pay the bills, and Marty decides to visit his old pal's place of residence. Shortly after arriving at Doc's house, a new DeLorean arrives and it's up to Marty to work out from where it was sent from. For the most part, gameplay works like most of Telltale's other games. The player controls Marty as he interacts with people and the environment around him in order to progress through the story. Conversing with characters has always been a big part of Telltale games and it remains so here. However, Back to the Future differs from the like of The Walking Dead and The Wolf Among Us due to the fact that the dialogue and the narrative isn't centered around choice. This means the players won't see any notifications pop up such as Doc will remember that after they have a conversation. I guess this is a creative choice on the developer's part, as it would be extremely difficult to make a time travelling game with a lot of possible branching dialogue trees. In addition, as I mentioned in a previous video, most of the time these choices don't really mean much anyway, so I'm glad that Back to the Future is just focused on telling a specific story, rather than being a story which is supposedly influenced by players' decisions. There is quite a large amount of dialogue featured in the game, and overall the voice acting is superb. Christopher Lloyd reprises his role as Doc Brown.
No, that's far too dangerous.
And although Marty McFly isn't voiced by Michael J. Fox, AJ Locascio does a near perfect impression of him.
You have a rocket-powered drill?
Not yet. I haven't built it yet.
A lot of the dialogue in the game is optional, i.e. the player doesn't have to inquire about said subject in order to advance the story. Nonetheless, I feel that hardcore Back to the Future fans will be pleased with the amount of information they can attain from the game's characters. I managed to have a conversation with Doc about how another DeLorean came to be, in which he explained to me the whys and hows of it. This conversation is entirely optional. However, I'm glad I spoke to Doc about it, and I felt quite rewarded to learn about the circumstances surrounding the creation of another time machine. One small annoyance I have with the dialogue is that it cannot be skipped. Sometimes the game requires the player to select a correct option from the dialogue choices in order to complete a puzzle. If the player picks wrong, they'll have to start the conversation again, which means watching through the same dialogue again, which results in a very tedious experience. Compared to the later Telltale video games, Back to the Future features a rather big emphasis on puzzle solving. The player is almost always having to figure out how to complete some kind of challenge. Some of the puzzles are pretty simple, but some have me stumped for quite a long time. If you have played classic point-and-click adventure games, then you'll probably have no problem with Back to the Future's puzzle elements. But for someone like me who hasn't had much experience in said genre, I found a few of the solutions to certain puzzles to be rather obtuse. Luckily, the game features a hint system, which provides players with clues if they want them. There's no requirement to unlocking said clues, with the last clue being more explicit in telling the player what to do than the first. This means in theory a player could simply open up the menu, look at all the clues and then complete the puzzle. Some will argue that this shouldn't be included in the game, but I disagree. There's no fun in being stuck on a puzzle for hours, and I feel like this is a brilliant mechanic. I decided to only use a clue when I was completely stuck, and then I would use another one if I still couldn't figure the puzzle out after another 10 minutes or so. Personally, I really like how Telltale tackled their approach to giving out hints in this game. In terms of the narrative, the game is a lot of fun, and feels very much at home in the Back to the Future universe. Players will spend the majority of their time in the year 1931, but will also travel to other time periods. My personal highlight was travelling to an alternate 1985, to witness an Orwellian Hill Valley ruled over by Citizen Brown. Unfortunately, the story does tread a lot of old ground, with one episode pretty much focused on stopping Marty fading away from existence, which is pretty much the plot of the first film. Despite this, the story does manage to be engaging throughout, and there were times where I couldn't wait to find out what happened in the next episode. However, it does feel like the overabundance of puzzles gets in the way of the progression of the narrative. Sometimes it can feel like hours before Marty actually moves the story forward anywhere. Clocking in at around 15 hours, the game definitely does have a lot of pacing problems when compared to the more exciting films. The ending is also rather disappointing. Without spoiling things, the ending offers no closure, while seeming to set up a second season. The problem is with it being 5 years since this game was originally released, and with Telltale currently working on so many projects, it seems improbable that we will ever see a second season, leaving us instead with a rather unsatisfying ending. I find a lack of locations in this game to be another problem. I don't know whether this was due to budget constraints or whether it was a deliberate choice, but there are only a couple of locations for Marty to explore each episode, with some of them being the same locations that were in the previous episode. I feel like episode 4 is a prime example of this limitation. During this episode, the player spends their time going back and forth between two tiny locations for about 3/4 of its runtime. The game world ends up feeling rather small because of this. In terms of the presentation of the game, it manages to tick most of the Back to the Future boxes. The sound effects and music sound like they are pulled straight out from the movies, and it's also nice to see the time and date pop up every time a new episode begins, or when the player resumes their save game. There's a lot of tiny details included in the game that fans of the franchise will be able to pick up on, which all manage to bring a smile to my face. The introduction to the game is brilliant in that it asks the player to recreate a scene from the first movie. There is even a trophy if the player manages to select the same dialogue choices that Marty said in the film, which I'm sure will please most fans. The game runs pretty smoothly for the most part, although during the last episode I experienced a bug when playing through a puzzle section, which left Marty completely stuck and unable to get out of the area, resulting in me having to quit and restart the sequence. I also experienced the game completely freezing during this episode. Visually, the game looks like any other Telltale game. It's not going to blow anyone away with its graphics, but it does look decent enough. One thing I should mention is that when upon starting an episode, the player is given the option to display goals. This means when Marty has a new objective, it will pop up on the screen. A word of warning, do not select this. Doing so causes a rather big box of text to be constantly displayed in the left hand corner of the screen. In addition, I also experienced an instance where another goal popped up whilst I was having a conversation with Marty's dad. This completely took me out of the experience. I should also mention that this game has an age rating of 16, which is rather bizarre considering all the films are PG, which I'm sure is going to disappoint some younger fans. I mean, yes, there is a tiny bit of swearing in this game, but there really isn't anything else that merits the game deserving a 16 rating, so I have no idea how Peggy managed to reach this decision. For most of my playthrough I had fun with Back to the Future the game. It never quite reaches the heights of the films or even newer Telltale games, but it does do a respectable job of letting players jump into the shoes of Marty McFly. It's nice to play a point and click game which enables gamers to just play through the story laid out in front of them, rather than being a choose your own adventure style of game. Unfortunately, this also means that Back to the Future has little replay value. With only one possible ending and no branching paths in the narrative, it is unlikely I or many others will play through the game again. I feel the game could have also possibly used a bit of trimming. It's rather slow at times and there was definitely far too many puzzles for my liking, which often took me out of the experience. It also manages to retread a lot of old ground, and it would have been nice to be able to visit some more varied locations than the few that are offered in the game. As a fan of the Back to the Future franchise, I did enjoy this game, although I don't think I'm going to look back on it in a few years and think about what an amazing experience it was. It does have a lot going for it, but it can also feel like a slog at times, and it's obvious Telltale hadn't quite perfected the point and click genre when they were making it. Back to the Future the game is a good experience, but not a great Scott one. So thank you for watching, like and comment if you like this video, and please subscribe. Till next time, bye bye.